All right, all right, all right.
right.
We are back. It is now 2023. Wait, I think we covered that last time.
Yep.
Okay, so we already know what year it is. It's a new year, new me, that whole deal. But we were thinking today, I was just painting this wall behind us for the last 2 days, and I was going like this the whole time. And all I could think of was Mr. Miyagi and Karate Kid. And Karate Kid wanted to be all fancy, learn all the crazy tricks, but Mr. Miyagi's like, nope, you're going to do this 10,000 times. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today is mastering the fundamentals. There's been some conversations that we've had recently with some students in our master classes and just people in general that got me really thinking about things. Before we do that, I'm blowing past the announcements again. So let me, that's at least consistent for the year. So what do we got, Sarah Scamness?
All right, so just a reminder, we've got our master classes have started up for the year. Our basic training course is already going, so you can always join in on that one for later dates. But we do have our microscope master class coming up, and that enrollment is open now, and classes will start on February 24th on a Friday. And so, like with all of our classes, they're 5 weeks long, and they're once a week for those 5 weeks. They're all live. They have pre-recorded videos for them so that you can always access the material that we cover in class with the videos. And then, of course, they all come with a forum as well where we all meet up and ask questions. So with the soil balancing course, that enrollment is opening next Thursday, and the class starts on March 23rd. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up that that next soil balancing course is coming up for open enrollment. So for the microscope course that starts on February 24th, it's pretty much everything you need to know to assess a soil and know what's happening in it and to make course corrections. So you're taught simple techniques for microbial assessment, so no spreadsheets and biomass per se. But you are taught organism identification. You're guided through the process from start to finish. You literally get to watch me do a live assessment, plus the assessment is recorded for you to go back. So I break it down for you. Every little technique that you need to learn is in the microscope course, and then we put it all together in the final assessment. So, and then there's an extensive microbe library that students can actually add to it if you want to, or whatever what we find. And there's the forum to ask any questions, stuff like that. So anyway, that's the microscope course. The soil balancing course, this is pretty much expert level soil balancing that Scott's just teaching everybody how to balance your own soil, plus all kinds of other different scenarios and soil types and things like that in the soil balancing class. So it covers the foundational principles for balancing soil chemistry. You're guided through all of your soil reports. We've got reports that we show you and guide you through each of the different steps because there's a lot to it. And then students also offer up their testing to get feedback on what they would do, and then everybody gets a chance to do a little bit of homework on different soil reports. So you're guided through lots of soil balancing exercises, all kinds of examples in class. You get a calculator tool with it, plus all kinds of insight you just don't get anywhere else. So,
And after the sessions are over, we meet once a month with all students.
that's
So,
true. That's for all classes, really. That's the microscope and the soil
And
balancing
here's a
class.
fancy little QR code if you want to scan. That'll go right to it.
Yep.
And now back to the show.
Regularly scheduled
Program. All right. So today we're talking about mastering the fundamentals. There's been some things that have happened in the last couple of weeks that made me really kind of reevaluate how we're communicating our message and how that affects people. And, we talk about high performance. We talk about, my NASCAR family members and all these things. And oftentimes people then interpret that as we're doing a ton of shit. And that's not it at all, really at all. What we do is just very expertly and in a calculated fashion implement basic fundamentals. So our primary fundamental of focus is the biological methods of Dr. Elaine Ingham. We take our own twist on them, but her method of using a light microscope to analyze soil organisms. I still will, to this day, I'll let you know if my mind changes, but I don't see it changing anytime soon, that I will still assert that the most valuable tool to a soil-based farmer is the microscope assessment tool.
Yep.
And from 2015 to 2018, we did stacks and piles and piles and piles of microscope assessments for farms. And in those earlier years, it was kind of a curiosity thing. It was new. People were like, what is this? So it was like, show me. And the further we get down the road, it seems to be more people interested in living soil, and percentage-wise, less people interested in investigating that living soil and what is living in there. Mm-hmm. And so our first foundational, major principle to keep simple and execute perfectly is the biological means of the soil. And we've learned through microscope assessment that everything you do affects soil organism communities either positively or negatively. So too much water, too little water, too much pesticide, all these things have dramatic effects. And, as Sarah and I became competent of the microscope and all the various tea brewing techniques and all those things, there's all kinds of fancy techniques you can do with biology to try and tweak different numbers or get different ratios to come into play or bring up one specific organism. But really, everywhere we go, we use the absolute most simple technique, which is the compost extract. We don't do teas. We don't advise people to do teas, to be honest. And
unless you know what you're doing.
Which is a very hot thing to say, because most people then get offended because
it's a very
they brew
responsible
teas.
thing to say. Sorry.
No, I'm with you. I'm an advocate. I agree with the words. I just always feel that we need to clarify. People are most often offended by that, saying we can do it, but not you.
Yeah.
And that's not it at all. But
yeah.
Statistically speaking, we've worked with hundreds of farms. A large percentage of those farms brew teas. Every single one of them was making disease. So that's what we're talking about. So, trying to do these very complicated tea brews, or you're just asking for trouble. You're asking for volatility. And so, we would encourage you to get the basic fundamentals of the living portion of living soil. This is becoming a very popular tag word. Most people are not looking at all into the living component of it. So, I would personally encourage you to track that soil you're working with through a typical harvest cycle. So, in the case of cannabis, you're looking 12, 14 weeks. Something like a bell pepper is going to be 70 days. That's 10 weeks, I guess. Similar schedule. Isn't that interesting? So what would you recommend, Sarah, for implementing the basic fundamentals of soil food web technology?
Yeah, tracking it. So that is the number one basic fundamental, is tracking the biology. So let me just back up and say that's why we included in the basic training class, is because you go through Elaine's courses and it's all theory and you're learning a whole lot of book work, but not any of it is really jiving with you yet, and it's not really going to jive with you yet until you start putting it into practice with the way that you're cultivating. So that's why we included in, all of our basic training master classes, because you as a grower need to know how to tweak the system, how to see if you're implementing the microbes and they're taking, or they're growing, or they're, something that you just did hindered the progress. You need to be able to put two and two together with everything that you are learning from Elaine's courses or just from the masterclass itself. You need to put it all together into one cohesive cultivation method so that all this data that's coming into you actually makes sense. So tracking it fairly closely over time will give you the best feedback to you as a cultivator that will make way more sense, instead of going, getting your bioassay, making a change, and then maybe, 6 weeks later you check it again. I think it's going to be to your best effort and your best learning to track it much closer than that, so that when you make a change, you can literally see the difference in what that change made, And then you can put two and two together and solidify the learning as to what makes the difference in what organisms as to what shows up. So that's fundamental.
Yeah.
Basics.
The important part that I took out of there, I'll be honest, I got distracted by a couple of comments. But one thing that I did pick up is making one change. It's really common that people change 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 things each harvest, and you have no way knowing what is leading to what outcome. And that's how we start to get, I think, what they call confirmation bias. And so you see something that you're able to assert is the cause for something when honestly, a lot of times it's not even that at all. So go really slow. It's very common. People get excited. They want to provide all these food sources. They want to get the most raging biology, and they throw the kitchen sink at it, and they hit it with 10, 12 different products, and you can't tell what actually helped, what actually hurt.
Just give me the recipe.
Just give me the recipe. Everybody just wants the recipe. Yeah. The recipe is track biology from start to finish on a harvest cycle with changing the least amount of things as possible.
We're trying to go beyond that. We're trying to teach you a method of discerning what you should include and what to not include, what you should, how much water to use and how much to back off on. It's a method of a discernment in regenerating soil, in restoring your soil microbiome. It's scientific tools to lead you down that path.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, that's all I got. Anything else? Just kidding.
But so what we're saying is that put the basics together and then get the data back to see where you're at, your baselines. Then you make a change, and then what's that course correction? What's the next set of data tells you close enough in that data set to inform what you just did so that it becomes solidified as to what's happening and you've only made one change. Those are the incremental steps that you really just can't blow past. You really have to do those fundamental steps to teach you what's happening. And you learn so much, just by changing one food resource or backing off on your watering just a little bit, or what is that one little change that you're going to do? And then we help guide you what that change ought to, if you're thinking about it, if you understand the principles that Elaine talks about, and Dr. Albrecht and Arden Anderson talk about, when it comes to balance, what are those changes? What are those slight tweaks that we need to do to then, when we get our next data set, actually make sense, and we can say, aha, this one thing led to this actual piece of information that we can tie it to. Because otherwise you can't say that if it's too many things you're changing.
I would advise tracking the biology through a harvest cycle and only change watering volumes.
Yeah, that would be very informative.
That seems to be the biggest indicator. But if you're feeding this and feeding that and feeding this and feeding that and spraying this and adding this and frassing this, and you get very confused data sets and actually delays your learning. So, and I'm guilty of that too. Like I'm a weird both ends of the pendulum. Like I grew up in sports where when it was batting days, we would do drills for an hour before we even took a swing at a ball. We would break the swing down into 10 parts, and we would do that for an hour before we started hitting. And then I still, in my farming journey, still have had moments where I throw the kitchen sink at it and just confuse myself. And we do see it a lot. We see it where people try too many things at once, and you actually delay the learning. So our intention is to learn the most as fast as possible. And to be honest, the way that you do that is by simplifying, changing only one variable, and tracking that in some way. That would be my big advice for this.
And oftentimes the conglomerate of what people are doing, in the name of living soil, doesn't actually lead to the type of life you're looking for, or the type of life that gives you the results you want. So you need to pare it down to what are those fundamentals that actually, what are the building blocks that I need to put together? And then from there, what do I need to adjust? Can I actually bring in this favorite amendment that I like, and see if that helps or hinders? And if it hinders, well, is it a dose or is it the actual item that you're bringing in. Is it, is it no dose that, any dose will make it go into anaerobic conditions, or can you use it at a small dose, or can you use it at a big, what does that look like? Big dose, small dose, no dose? Those are the kinds of things that you need to be asking, yourself and teaching yourself, because, when we're gone, people need to know how to do this. You need to be able to systematically break it down, you know what I mean? And that, anyway, we're just trying to teach you how to think for yourself,
And we've analyzed a lot. We've worked with some very big farms. We've worked with very small farms. We've worked with famous people. We've worked with people you've never heard of. And still, probably the most impactful thing you can do in a soil-based farming system is figure out how to get biological populations steady as well as high in a beneficial fashion. I think people spend so much time chasing new trends and new products and new techniques, and those might give you small incremental bits of improvement, but getting the biology straight in this living soil system, in my opinion, should be your first goal. That's about it.
Yep.
That's about it.
Everything revolves around that, that's for sure.
Yeah. Because everything moves faster. So if you're fertilizing and biology's on track, it's going to get delivered faster. So everything you do gets amplified. We got people from all over the dang world here today,
That's awesome.
This is pretty cool. Should we just jump into questions?
Sure. Let's just jump into questions.
Yeah, that's all I had. I just had I didn't really have a massive presentation for y'all today. We got someone that wants us to start over. Should we start over? No, we're not. Let's see. Let's just do some question and answer today. So, what would you say is the best step after graduating the Soil Food Web Foundation courses?
Put it into action. Try to put it into action immediately. That's why I built that's why we built the Crescent Method basic training, is so you can take what you just learned and put it into a cohesive method and actually grow along with people and learn together, and you can see how it is that we put it all together and how you get the results that you do. That's you need to put it into action. Whether you're doing our masterclass or not, put it into action. Yeah. Go get yourself on the microscope as much as possible. Grow when you start your season. Maybe you haven't started your season yet. We're still in snow. So, when you start your season, get your baseline. Plant, do your first inoculations and show yourself exactly, are we increasing in certain organisms or decreasing in others, or what's happening as I'm putting out these applications of BioComplete extract or whatever it is that you're doing, your watering techniques. Just start tracking it and showing yourself systematically what's happening in the soil, making sense of it.
Yeah, that's
put it into action.
Sarah and I did tons and tons of practical application of the microscope methods. Yeah. That's what got us here, honestly.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people go through the classes and they have a hard time starting. Just start where you're at with whatever. The composting can be overwhelming. Few people sell it nowadays. But just track anything. We had a student in a master class that tracked a single flower pot. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to, don't feel like because you don't have access to a mega farm that you're not doing good work. Like, just buy a couple houseplants. You want some real practical application? Go buy some hydroponic houseplants from the Home Depot stores and convert them to living soil. That's what I would do. That's where the next big work's coming. All these salty ass farms are trying to jump on the living soil, which we invite you, but that'd be good practice. I used to go and buy the worst looking plants on sale and see if I could pop them back to life. And it's really easy with a house plant. It's way easier than cannabis or something else. You give it a little bit of compost extract, a little bit of kelp, and that thing's raging. So that's what I would recommend. Put it into practice immediately and just, use a good scientific process. Change one single variable and quantify it so you're getting good data.
Yep.
So... and then, so I guess a continuation question I think this was when we were talking about our master classes, is what should you do after completing Elaine's Future Cannabis episode 1? I don't know what that is. Foundation course 1. That's what it is. Foundation Course 1.
Which I believe is the main bulk of her lessons.
Yeah.
And then the next ones go on to the making the extracts, the compost, and the
Yeah.
microscope. Well, that's really just kind of the foundation of the theory behind it. So, if you're wanting to learn how to use the information that you just learned in the first lessons, then you do have to go on to the next steps. And I think it's just whatever whatever you feel called to do first. Composting kind of comes when you have the time, when all of the variables of time and resources converge. So you got to get the learning of what it is you're doing, and then you got to make the time for it and get the resources for the type of composting you're about to do. But at some point, put that as a stake in the ground out in the future that you got to learn how to do that if composting is what you want to learn how to do as well.
Yeah. It's an important part of the component,
Yeah.
or for the system. I think the nice thing about Dr. Lane's courses gives you a lot of scientific information, but we had to develop our own method for using the information. So that's why we have the CMBT, which tells you a practical method on how to apply the biological principles. If you have any desire to be a soil food web consultant, I would strongly advise you to take the mineral balancing class. That is the actual reason, or one of the main reasons we have that class, is because you really need to do both. If you've been paying attention, I've said that all the time. Don't want to keep harping on it, but you can only go so far with just biology. And honestly, in 2023, things are so damaged. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, you could have just thrown biology in there, but even still, biology speeds things up. So if you have a deficiency, it's going to accelerate that deficiency. It'll buffer it, but it's going to accelerate it. So you still need to know mineral balancing. And it's hard to do living soil anything without the ability to at least fire up a microscope and take a look at things. So that's why we created our qualitative course, which is more accessible and easier to learn, I think, but still perfectly practical. David King's one that threw me off. That's his goal every time, and he got me this time. It's actually the same exact books. They're just
different configuration.
They're just different configuration. We just moved offices. That's probably why the sound is probably atrocious. I apologize. We haven't done any sound treatment. I barely got this wall painted today. Got a little bit of paint in my hair, but whatever. We tried to make it look exactly like the last one, so you didn't even know we moved. Let's see here. What can I do to reduce sodium in the soil? First question there is, where is it coming from? Did you contribute it, or is it coming in your water? If it's coming in your water, you're going to need to continually reduce it, and that is going to be a problem. Sodium is one of those pretty problematic compounds in living soil as it builds up, or because it builds up. I guess I said that kind of weird, but we do see that biology does start to break it down. You just have to minimize contributing more. So if it's there because you put it there through a lot of ocean-based amendments, or through sodium-based clays, or if it's in your water. If it's in your water, you're probably going to need to address it, because as long as you're not contributing more, I do see on the soil tests sodium going down when biological activity is high. So not doing anything other than we normally do, but if you're continuing to contribute, that is going to be a problem. I am a strong advocate against flushing soils. That may be the textbook answer, but that's a solid way to make a complete disaster of your farm. So I don't do that. I think I've only flushed out a soil one time. I'm not with it. I don't think that's a good idea. There's too much variation that can come from it, and I've seen reports from people in this chat that flushed out and the sodium didn't go down, calcium went down. So it's not like you're just magically dislodging sodium. Sometimes you dislodge a whole bunch of stuff that you wanted and didn't dislodge the sodium. So I don't like flushing at all. I'm not going to get on board with that. You can try to tie it up or complex it while biology breaks it down. So humic acids, fulvic acids, Provita works really well, something we sell, which has humics and fulvic acids in it. And then just do everything you can to get biology up, and then don't contribute more. As long as you're not continuing to contribute more, I see that it's not that big of a problem. So,
Yeah, let us know if this is a native soil that actually has high sodium too. I know we have that here. So.
Yeah, we do keep compost in the first aid kit and all of that.
That is a good, yep.
Yeah.
Too funny. And you do. You're like, I've got to have my it's all about the compost.
It's hard to do living soil without living organisms.
You know, it might have something to do with the fact that you're not really turning it as much on the Johnson Sioux, and you know, people tend to not go for higher temperatures as well on a Johnson Sioux.
Yeah.
You still have to, you know, meet those benchmarks of the temperature algorithm, but because you don't need the compost to make a certain number of turns, the recipe is different, and the way that you treat the compost is different. So I think that's why it lends itself to higher biologic or fungal populations. But it all depends on the recipe and how you manage the moisture in the recipe. So it's not just that any Johnson Sioux will create that, because I've seen some Johnson Sioux that have zero, almost no fungi.
The ones Johnson shows on his video have almost no fungi.
And they have spores, but they don't have any active biomass. So
we need Dr. Johnson
I've seen
to come take
other
our microscope class, and we'll help them out.
I've seen other Johnson Sioux videos or composts that people have made that have not really have not been that great, and it just depends on how you're putting it all together.
Sorry, I interrupted with the wrong word. You were talking about bad compost. I was thinking about the Johnson Sioux that you've made that have had phenomenal numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, they do have phenomenal numbers, but you can, you know, it's all about, you know, understanding the core concepts that go into making high fungal. It's you know, the core components have to be there.
So, continued question on from the high sodium. So the typical two tests that we get are the Malic 3, which is designed to give you the total nutrient pool, and then the paste test, or more formally the saturated paste test, is meant to tell you what's currently water soluble. And I don't find that the saturated paste is all that helpful, and the more that I say that, the more resistance comes back from the internet. But I find for actual living soil, now if you want to pump chemicals into a cocoa core media, knock yourself out with a sat paste test. But for actual soil and actual living soil, I don't find the sat paste is all that helpful for balancing the soil. What I see in my work is if we analyze a large volume of soil, say, you know, we take 100 cubic yards of soil and we break it down into 5 or 6 tests, the saturated paste tests on all those might be within 10 to 15% of each other, but you might have a 300% variation on the Malic 3 test. Not in my soil, but in other soils that we analyze. And so I, like, you know, it's going to take a lot for me. It's going to take a lot to convince me that the Malic 3 is not where we should focus, because I see every day in my work that it is where we should focus. A lot of people say that the Malic 3 is not accurate. I would argue that the variation amongst the soils we're dealing with is so remarkable, it erroneously gives people the idea that the Malic 3 is not an accurate test. But the saturated paste test, if it's saying sodium is high, more specifically to the question, if the saturated paste test is saying sodium is high, then it's probably coming from your water, and you probably need to investigate that. The best use of the saturated paste test is to send your water in with that test, and it's going to show you some more interesting information. So now, what's high on the sat paste? Is it just from a percentage standpoint? Because sodium can look high if calcium, magnesium, and potassium are low. So is the sodium high, actually, functionally high, or is it just proportionally high to the things that we want more of? So things really do start to get problematic when sodium is higher than calcium or potassium on the saturated paste test. That's a real problem. So there you go. So I would still, I think, just I guess to recap in a more coherent fashion, if you're going to start the journey of balancing a soil, I believe you should start with the Malic 3 and address variation. So if you have multiple pots, multiple beds, multiple rows, multiple whatever, there is a variation there that will not be revealed to you on the saturated paste test. It's only going to be revealed to you on the Malic 3 test. And you should mark where you took the samples. So when you follow up, sample from the same exact location, that helps minimize some of the variation that people see on the Malic 3 and just throw it out with the bathwater and say it's not good. That's what I do. So yeah, we got Smiley's Garden in the house.
What's up, Smileys?
We got New York here too. I think I did all these.
Very
Trying
cool.
to shout out to the homies.
Yes.
Let's see here. So yeah, and this is a good point by Becky. You know, back to the what should you do? Becky's on the Soil Food Web journey as well. Is going to be advising farms. And what's your goal? Do you want to be an advisor? Do you want to just work on your own farm?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to be advising people, you need to put it into practice. So that's going to have to be on your list at some point in time. Learn as much as you can, put it into practice. So, but yeah, I mean, you can be. The way that I did it is I put it immediately into practice, and I constantly did bioassays one after the other. But I was up at Elaine's farm, literally running the farm for 3 weeks at a time with different interns. So I had a lot of practice doing many bioassays, making decision calls and things like that. So it was day in and day out for me once I took this journey. But you can do that no matter what at your own place. Just find, if you have a place to grow, or if you know somebody who will let you manage their garden, anything, whatever.
Anything.
But put it into practice, and then while you work on learning the compost thing, I kind of wove it all together as it fit in. But you need to have that personal experience with it. And the reason why we say put it together and change one thing is because especially if you're going into the consultant, you need to know what is that. If that client comes to you and says, I want to do this one thing, and you have personal experience that says that one thing is detrimental, you need to be able to know that. You know what I mean? So changing one thing at a time and knowing what those incremental changes are and do, to the soil food web, and thus the outcome is very important. So just doing, having a little bit of research area in your backyard or somewhere close by that you can actually go to on the regular and put out treatments and things like that. I'm all for that. I would put it into practice, but yeah. Basic
fundamental repetitions should be a main goal. So we got some continued conversation at C. So going back to the sodium in the soil issue.
Oh, okay.
We got some thoughts that it may have come from the castings, which is very likely, very possible. And yeah, once you get the soil balance, you're going to want to inoculate with a proper biologically complete compost, which we sell. And like most people, you started with a Coots recipe. That's okay. We can fix that for you. Most of us start there, but don't stop there. And the best answer that we've seen so far is that it's in big totes. So how I would approach this is I would make a homogenized sample of that soil and send it into Logan Labs for the Malic 3. You can do the lower cost one. Make sure you include the bulk density, which assigns the weight of the soil. It can be helpful at that time to also know the nitrogen, which is a couple extra bucks. And then once you know what that soil looks like from a mineral chemistry standpoint, then you can take like a 27-gallon tote, which is 3 cubic feet, and then I can write recommendations for 3 cubic feet of soil. And what you do is you throw out a tarp on the ground or put it in a wheelbarrow, and you put the amount of minerals needed for that 3 cubic foot. Because I think where people get really lost in the concept of this mineral soil chemistry stuff is this is weight by weight comparisons. The weight of the minerals and the weight of the soil develops a ppm, or a part in a million. And if you get a soil test and you got a pile of soil on the ground, you just haphazardly mix stuff into that pile, you're not really helping or truly correcting that soil. So I would try to be as strategic as possible while you have this soil in a tote where it can be dealt with. and you can pull it out 3 cubic feet at a time and mix in some minerals. And then if you have more than one pot or bed, I would take the time to fill them all up equally. If there is variation in your soil, you magnify it greatly if you fill up one container to its entirety and then move to the next one. So if there's wild variation in your soil from the mixing process or whatever, that variation is minimized if you put a couple inches of layer in every container all the way up to the top, if that makes sense. So that's what I would do. So I would do that. And I do that all day long. Not all day long, but all week long. That exact thing that we just described. That's what I do right here at this exact desk, actually. Here's a really good question, Sarah. You want to tackle that one?
Okay, so some of the principles that we have learned and we teach are that if you're having pest and disease, you're out of balance somewhere in the 3 core things, one or more of them. So either your microbes are out of balance, your minerals are out of balance, or the nutritional flow of what is available, is out of balance. So, or all of them, or 2 of them, it's going to be some sort of mix and blend of that happening based on the history and physical, right? What has happened to that particular tree or orchard or whatever in the past? Is there something tying up? All those things go into the mix. So we start with our data points. We get our minerals and our microbe test, and then we just start treating from there. We've never had to use any, well, I won't say never. There, on occasion, we do have to use something to knock back a blight if it's really bad or something like that. But typically, nutrition is the course correction for something like that, and or the microbe component. With orchards, it's really important that you get your nutrition right in the foliar feeding, and it's also very important to get your microbes right in the soil. So it's kind of a balanced approach with course correcting the underlying cause of why the blight is there in the first place. We don't get all upset and emotional about a disease or a pest outbreak. We just allow nature to tell us that there's something off and that we need to investigate what is off. If there's something that we need to address in the immediate, because there could be crop loss or something like that if we don't address it like tomorrow or something, and the timing of things. Otherwise, we get the data and we course correct that way. So most of the time when we're addressing like a fungal disease, it's going to be a nutritional foliar is going to be more effective than like a compost tea even. We've done trials on certain blights with grapes, for instance, where actually silica outperformed compost tea in this instance. So, and why is that? Because we met the threshold needed for change to move that crop back into health. And that's what you need to know. Where am I out of balance, and what is that threshold needed for change to bring that crop back into health? So, but foliar feeding and soil feeding, making sure that each of those trees have the mycorrhizal associations with the tree, that you get those spores inoculated in the root zones, which means if they're established trees, you're going to have to drill. You're going to have to make a hole and do some acupuncture with some mycorrhizal spores in the earth, and some biology.
Yeah, another thing to consider there is most orchards of nuts, they purposely keep the soil compacted and bare and full of herbicide so that it makes it easier to harvest the nuts. Those agricultural practices put you into a guaranteed battling situation. If the soil's compacted and lacking oxygen, you're going to be in that disease-causing organism range that causes blights. So that's a real tricky one to tackle, honestly, because it's everything needed to fix that, to not to have blights easily, goes against the needs of the harvesting an orchard crop like that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. You're going to have to, like Sarah said, inject along the rows where the harvesters don't drive, and try to get a non-compacted, which is also partially rooted in soil chemistry balance, calcium to magnesium ratios, and get the biology in there to allow porosity, to allow oxygen in the root zone, to literally outcompete things like blight.
So if you put up 2 and 3, he's basically saying that the foundation courses would say get the diversity in the soil and try to get the environment as healthy as possible. And that's what we're saying is that in order to get the environment as healthy as possible, you do have to take in that ancient, the history and physical.
Yeah.
What is the herbicides using? You have to also take into consideration that any herbicide, any pesticide, any of those sides are going to tie up certain nutrients, and that will be why that nutrient is deficient and why it's causing it now causing it to be susceptible to the blight or whatever. And so that's why that is oftentimes the thing that changes, that causes that threshold of change. You meet that threshold needed for that plant to be healthy. And so that's why we teach mineral balancing and nutrition, because it is the complement to nature's system, because we've gotten it so out of balance with everything that we're doing with harvesting, with compaction, with herbicides and pesticides and all that stuff. You need to understand how to you need a different tool in the shed.
Yeah.
You need to learn how to use nutrition to combat disease rather than an herbicide. We all know how to use an herbicide or a pesticide. We just need to now know how to learn how to use nutrition also strategically. So
yeah, we've had some really good results with trace mineral applications anytime herbicides are used. So iron, manganese, copper, and zinc are really important, along with boron. I believe it's manganese and iron specifically that are tied up with the herbicides. Can't remember off the top of my head. But nonetheless, that blight is there because you're lacking oxygen in the soil from compaction from harvesting. You're having inability, or the plant does not have the ability to access the appropriate levels of nutrition, most likely due to the impact of herbicides. And so you're going to need to address all those things.
Yeah.
And most importantly, people get really specifically focused. So this one was about I'm not even going to try and say that, chinquapin blight. To me, I still group it into it's a pathogen problem. We're lacking oxygen in the soil. We're having a competition issue with beneficial fungi, and there's a nutritional disorder because of all that.
Yep.
So don't get so focused on the specific species. People want to speciate all the time in our consulting, and I really don't care about any of that.
Don't do it.
It doesn't matter. Like if you're in the aerobic oxygen soil zone, those things don't exist. So it doesn't matter if it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, whatever fungal pathogen. It doesn't matter what it is. You're still in the fungal pathogen zone. Get out of fungal pathogen zone. The way you do that is aeration in the soil, proper microbes, and then nutrition. So this is kind of an interesting one. We haven't been asked here on the show here. So can you discuss the legal liability side of working as a consultant and what sort of contracts are utilized? So this is kind of a two-part question. There's a really specific answer and a more general answer. Not talking about legal, but liability. And I think responsibility would be the word I would use. I think more important than legal liability is the responsibility that you're mucking around with people's livelihood. Yeah. And that is something that Sarah and I take of the utmost seriousness. Sarah comes from a nursing career, which the actual oath is do no harm. I was raised by a mother that was a nurse that taught at the college. I definitely heard that Hippocratic oath growing up. And that's our primary focus, is to not cause harm. And I think a lot of advisors get out there into the real world and really quickly want to get into things, and they lose sight of that you're mucking around with people's liability, and that's people's livelihood rather. And this is a very critical time for farmers. Everybody's crunched for water, everybody's crunched for money. So the most important thing is making sure that you're not engaging in advising a farm in a way that makes them further vulnerable. And the main way that you do that is by trying to do too much at once. So start out by establishing baselines so you know where you're at. That's the first thing we do from a liability standpoint, which is just good for business. And so if you establish chemistry baselines, biological baselines, you can see very clearly where you're at and where you need to go. And if progress is not made, that's been defined. And if progress is made, that's been defined, which still falls down to liability and advising farms. We do utilize mutual non-disclosure agreements. It's just best for everybody that way. This is one of my really crass examples, but I liken our work to like a proctologist. It's very intimate work. It's often not pretty, and nobody wants you to talk about it. And that makes it difficult to make a movement, so most of our work has been extremely private, and a lot of it will remain extremely private, which is in fun. It makes it harder for everybody else in the world, but it makes it way better for the farmer and the advisor, in my opinion, when you have a mutual agreement of privacy.
It creates a safe place, a safe space for everybody to learn and make mistakes, or, not everybody, but you know what I mean? You need to be able to learn, and they, most importantly, need to feel like they can make a move without it being scrutinized or anything like that. It's nobody else's business but theirs, and the focus is on them. And I would say that do no harm, that's just good humaning, and I think we all should especially now more than ever, take a stance of do no harm to the planet, and it's not that we're never ever gonna kill something to eat it and all that. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying, generally speaking, let's try to not do so much harm, right? I think we're in a good audience. We could say that.
Yeah.
But part of liability for that is receptivity to change.
Yeah.
You need to be able to assess whether people are receptive to change, and a lot of that just comes with how you approach it, how you teach it. What do they want? What are they willing to do? What are they? What's important to them?
Yeah.
And it's just all about that. We're all in this world right now where we're really forced to change, and some of us are willing to do that much more than others, and some of us want to do that in theory and maybe can't really make the step forward for whatever reason. And there could be more reasons than just what meets the eye.
Yeah.
So I think just being gracious about that and trying to make a safe place for people where they're not shamed, they're not anything like that they can even attempt to make change, but you will need to determine whether or not they're willing and able to do that. Mm-hmm. That's part of the liability as well.
I think a real important aspect that comes with contracts is whether you go for some lengthy, extremely legal binding contract or something written on a napkin, it is essential at the start of the relationship that you define what you will provide, what the farmer will do, and you both agree on it. That's the most important thing, and what it takes to get there. That's a big part of qualifying clients for us. It's just literally Sarah and I by ourselves here. We don't have like this crazy army of consultants. We can only manage properly a handful of farms, and so we do have to, delay people or sometimes deny people. And the contract portion is a good way to see where people are at. I think if somebody has some ill motives with you, they're going to tend to not want to have anything to do with a contract. So being disciplined and being professional is, I think, essential for your business success, because for one, you need to come correct. You wrote it down. So like if you're not honoring your own contracts, you don't deserve to be in business. And if you're not adhering to what you defined you said you would do, then you're not going to be in business. And if you made a contract about it, you might get sued about it, right? So the contracts have been one of the hardest part for us as a small soil food web business. We didn't have extra $10,000 laying around to bring on a big attorney. And so we had to slowly, incrementally move up in contract fluency, so to speak. And I think that's fine. But most importantly, define what you're going to provide, define what the farm needs to do, and then, be clear about that and stick to it. And if you can't stick to it, then do a different business. And if the farmer can't stick to it, it's not a good client. So let's see here. So do you add worms to thermal compost when it's right after temps? When would you add worms?
Right after the temps stabilize. So I'm assuming when it comes down into ambient. Shortly after that, yeah. I wouldn't say like right after. I'm not like ready at the waiting when it comes down in temps. But the sooner you get them in there, and the reason why I don't really do that right at the get-go is because sometimes it wanders. Like especially if you move it, try moving the compost from the stage to its final destination, and if it doesn't jump up, it should be cooked and all that stuff, but just making sure. And so the stabilized part of it is very important. So I give it some time after I've moved it and making sure that it comes down and does actually stabilize, and then I will add my worms.
Yeah. But they definitely don't like the warmth. That's for sure.
No.
You'll know if they didn't like it because they'll be on the ground. Let's see here. Scrolling through. Got all those. So I'm not sure what this one's saying. Do you think community composting being a norm is possible? I don't know what community composting is. Do you know community composting?
Yeah, people contributing their scraps and things like that to a community composting, and then getting some compost back is typically the kind of the model. I absolutely think it can be a norm, and I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to be for things that are community oriented, because I think that we need to think more community oriented. I think if anything, a couple of things. COVID itself has showed me that resiliency comes in community. Yeah. And moving back to Utah, especially, I can't tell you how amazing it has been to be back in my home state and see how community oriented it is here and how resilient it actually is here because of that. Yeah. And so, people here they might not let you over in the fast lane or something like that, but they'll definitely, they'll definitely hold the door open for you. They'll do all kinds of nice things here for you. And, I'm not saying they're perfect here, but the community aspect is amazing.
In the last week, I've seen a highway patrolman changing a tire and a fireman Slim Jimmying a window to let a lady in. I was like, if I see a guy getting a cat out of a tree, I'm done. But it's crazy.
We do that here. We do, and it's lovely. It's a nice place to live because of it.
I've never seen that in my life.
So my ultimate. Somebody turned me on to agri-hoods that are happening, or like these neighborhoods that are kind of, building around a piece of agriculture. So, greenhouses and, livestock and some stuff like that. That is resiliency, and that's community oriented, and people give a shit about each other, and they give a shit about being connected to nature. And I'm going to be all for that. I think community compost, as long as it's run, by people who know what they're doing, because not all composting is, it's not like every compost has to be biocomplete, but I think that biocomplete community composting could be a part of it. It's just, it's all about sourcing.
Yeah.
So
it's going to take a lot of organization. You get some pretty good looks with static piles or big worm bins, because I think with a community pile, it's going to be not all one day,
Yeah, no, you're going to be getting lots of, anytime anybody, is working with a composting facility that gets a lot of food scraps, or the coffee place is going to want to give you coffee ground. You're going to need to know how to use these things in a way where you're making different, styles of compost for the community, right? Community has many different needs. Yeah. So.
This was a comment that I just want to touch on that I think it came through when we were talking about the contracts and all those things. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, especially in the master classes one-on-one, is that I came from a very, I don't want to say militant, but very disciplined and very serious hydroponic community in Southern California. And one of the things that they were most against was just showing up to the garage, blabbing on about some shit you read on the internet. And that was just not allowed. And so I just want to refine these words a little bit. And so what I'm trying to communicate in those situations is that it was simply not allowed to talk about things that you hadn't applied first yourself and were actually qualified on. And I'm really thankful for that. It seemed extreme at the time, and a lot of dudes seemed like, assholes, but I've gotten to this point because of that principle. Like, I don't advise people on things I'm not competent and proficient on. So, Joe, I don't want you to think like you can't talk. What I'm saying is speaking only about things you actually have a functional foundational knowledge of and keeping it to that. So when we first started advising farms, yeah, I had a ton of really quality cannabis background, but I'm not going to say I knew how to run a 400 light mega commercial building. I'm not saying I knew how to design that at that time. And at that time, I was very proficient at the biological assessment, and that's the service we provide, and that's the subject matter I commented on. And then obviously being surrounded by some of the largest farms on the planet, I picked up a few things along the way, and we continue to improve our skills and continue to read and study and put things into practice. And so that breadth of knowledge becomes bigger, and then we speak on more of those things. And I see a common trend. People get really enthusiastic. They come out, they want to be advisors, they want to be influencers, and they just start rattling off all kinds of things that they've not only not put into practice functionally in their own garden, they're quite problematic. And that's what I'm very much against.
So we do appreciate that, though, when people, take that kind of more of a stance of like, make sure you know what, you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm just dubbing this year as a year of discernment anyway, because my God, there's so much crazy, all kinds of stuff going on where right is left and left is right and up is down. And, it's all kinds of crazy. We are going to have to learn tools of discernment. And so for us on soil regeneration, we know what those are. And I won't speak to any other tools of discernment. You can decide for yourself, but we're going to need some.
Yeah. So. And here's some other comments going back to contract, which are absolutely true. If you're going to professionally advise, you're getting in a contract, it's like interview questions or dating questions. Try to get to know who you.
HIPAA violations.
Yeah. And so this is a really important one. One of the main reasons we did not start this YouTube until the time we did is anytime I spoke publicly about real examples, that usually ended that consulting relationship. So when I did a in-person workshops and used anonymized data from a client farm, that ended that relationship. Farmers get extremely sensitive even if they're not being named. If it's just they're being talked about publicly, it makes them very uncomfortable. Just even trying to do these science bros and just talk generally about things, it's very common that in that next week I'll have a Zoom and one of our farmers will be having some kind of feelings about that, and we got to work that out. So as confidential as you can be, it's better for everyone except for everyone else, right? And that's what people used to get really mad at me about from 2015 to 2021, I guess, is that I wasn't sharing. It's like, man, I'm a small business just trying to survive, and if I speak publicly about what we're learning and that ends a consulting relationship, that's very hard on my business. But now we're to a point where, it's a little bit different, and but
well, I mean, we generalize things in trends anyway, because that's more the meaningful information is the general trends of what we see out there. So, we can get into the specifics of those trends too, but it is important to make sure that we, keep people.
Well, because if you're working with a farmer and they feel like you're going to talk about their business, then from that day forward, they're going to tell you less and less, and then you can help them less and less, and just becomes a difficult situation. So what you're after is a safe space where people feel comfortable that they can actually be transparent. Yeah. Some of my best work experience was in the smaller scale, going around the hometown grows when I was just a guy from town or from the bar or a friend of somebody, and they would tell me everything. That was the last time that farmers were 100% transparent. We're always trying to figure out the little morsels. Not that they're trying to be defiant and omit things. Sometimes, yes, but Other times, like as an advisor, you're constantly just trying to figure out all the details to put together the picture, and that's pretty difficult, especially if the farmer doesn't feel like it's going to be confidential.
Right.
So that's super important. Do you prefer greenhouse or indoor, Sarah?
As close to nature as possible. I'm going to go
Yeah.
with greenhouse on that. But I would do
Yeah.
indoor. Like the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I do. You know, not that the greenhouse lights aren't good, but I do. I'm going to want to be outside as much as, or, you know,
Yeah.
as close to nature as possible. That's me. That's how I'm built. But I would do indoor too. But
Yeah. Yeah, obviously some really cool things happen under the sun, but if indoors all you got, do it while you can.
indoor, you can drive like a race car. That you can
Yeah.
totally dial in every little parameter, but it has a whole other can of issues,
Yeah.
you know.
Be as
for
efficient
it,
as
but-
possible if you're going to go indoors, my thing.
Yeah.
But I don't demonize it like a lot of hippies do. But economically, it's going to be tricky in the future unless you're really efficient at it. In a greenhouse, you can use the sun, open up the ridge vent, use very little energy, produce a ton of crop. So, yeah, and Sarah and I moved back to the suburbs, and it's almost a peer pressure to use Roundup. It's pretty crazy.
We were out there digging out the weeds.
Yeah, I was hand digging the weeds, and
I'm putting like straw around, you know.
Putting straw down.
And they're
That was
looking at me
funny.
like, why are you putting straw down? This is
Yeah.
a suburb. I'm like, I know
They're
you
like,
guys don't use straw,
just
but
watch.
I do. I
Just
don't
watch.
care.
Just check out the flowers.
So,
All right. So in one of the soil balancing classes, we had a student that was nowhere near any of the typical resources. So finding an aeration component was extremely difficult. So I advised him to use pea gravel, which was very affordable and very local. So it's not overly complicated. It's just in order to build a soil, like a potting soil, you need to have an aeration component in there. I would choose literal rocks over perlite for a permanent living soil. Pumice is my favorite because it's the most inert and it's lighter than lava rock typically. So for me, someone who's shipping soil, I need the lightest possible and I need it to not have heavy metals. So pea gravel is just a solution when pumice or lava rock's not available. A lot of times only the really large lava rocks for like fireplaces and decorative stuff is available to most people if there's not landscaping yards and soil type yards, and that stuff sucks. If it's really big, it's going to blast your knuckles when you're trying to transplant. So I like something that's a 1/2 inch or less, 1/2 inch to 3/8, anything really. For me, pea gravel is a terrible choice because it's heavier and that makes the trucking cost more. So, but so yep. Let's see here. So, hell yeah. Joe Kaz is in the soil balancing class. His lawn is looking good. Good.
awesome. Thank you very much for the love.
Yeah, and that's a cool compliment. Honestly, I think I've been pretty good at hitting all the buzzwords. We're at least doing a little bit of soft censoring on this channel. But yeah, it's weird. I'll go on FCP and get 20,000 views and we'll get a few hundred here. I'm not really worried about numbers, but it is interesting. But honestly, I think it's cool. The people that get it now are going to get the benefit before everybody else. So I ain't trying to talk to millions of people. I'm trying to talk to people that can listen and can put it into action. So thanks for joining, those of you that are here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let's see here. So, yeah. So this is the issue. The guy that I was just talking about with pea gravel is up in the New York area. Pumice is nowhere near New York. So that ain't gonna happen. So, yeah. And lava rock works just fine. You just want to have it small. So we're getting to the, that's an interesting thing. Rocks float up according to David Montgomery. I would say that perlite floats up, but I've never seen lava or pumice. Hydroton is how you know in the suburbs people are growing weed because there's hydroton in their driveway. That's how you know where the grow house is in the suburbs. I never used hydroton because I saw it in people's planters and flower gardens, and the neighbors don't know, but if somebody that would be interested in snatching your plants knows exactly what that is. So there we go. I think we're right about the hour. Yeah, and I have to thank Smiley too. Thanks, Smiley. Thanks,
He's definitely
Smiley.
somebody who's learning in a very public way, and
Yeah.
I just have to give him a shout out for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for all that you do, Smiley.
Smiley's doing all the opposite of every other influencer, and he's being honest and real and raw every day. And that's literally one of one that I've met. We did it on our own. We'd show crazy buggy ass plants and the repair of them. That just caused too much commotion in the internet. So shout out to Smiley for being real and authentic day to day. That's extremely rare, one of one. So with that, we've gotten to our hour goal for the session. We'll be back probably next week, a little bit more organized, hopefully with better quality sound. Thanks for tuning in,
Yep.
and we'll check you next week.
All right, take care.